Joining us now, Curtis Ellis. Curtis is a senior policy advisor with America First Policies. He's also a noted columnist on WND and The Hill. Also, he served in the Trump administration in the Department of Labor. He was on the transition team. He was in the campaign with me, and he's an all right, great guy. And Curtis and I have been fighting this Chinese tariff battle for 35 years. Curtis, the G20 summit, how many months have we been on the air, both of us, saying this tariff battle with the Chinese is a battle that the president absolutely cannot lose? He has to win simply because we're shipping $500 billion of our cash to them on an annual basis in the trade deficit. There isn't enough exports that exports that we have to China to make up for the tariffs. They have to crumble, and they have. What do you think of what came out of the G20 meeting with the deal this weekend, Curtis, with President Xi?
Well, it's very interesting. On the less interesting side, the fact is neither side got everything they wanted. We did not get China to declare an end to intellectual property theft, subsidizing companies, basically ripping us off every way they've been doing for the last 30 years. They didn't say they were going to do that. They didn't get us to say we're taking the tariffs away for good, and it's over. President Trump did not capitulate, and China did not agree to stop its cheating ways. So neither side got everything they wanted. What we did was President Trump postponed the tariffs for 60 days, not 90 days. They were planning to go into effect. They were planned to go from 10% to 25% on January 1st. He pushed it back 90 days from today. That would put it on to March 1st. So that's basically a 60-day postponement of the tariff increase, during which time China is supposed to begin negotiating with the U.S. over these big issues. Now, we'll see if they do, because you look at the Chinese statement that they put out to the Chinese state media and the Chinese-controlled media, because that's what it is. It's all government-controlled over there. They didn't mention anything about negotiations, and they didn't mention anything about 90-day postponement. So we'll have to see if they believe their own PR, right? I mean, there is that human factor here where you can say, well, the Chinese did not want to tell the people of China that President Xi made concessions to the Americans. But in an authoritarian system like that, they have a big pressure to start believing the propaganda that they tell their people. And this is a normal human thing. We all self-censor. I mean, self-censorship is something that humans do all the time. We do it over here. People are afraid to tell folks that they're Trump supporters. They self-censor because they don't want negative consequences. So over there, the Chinese officials are going to be running around saying, well, we never gave any concessions. We never agreed to negotiate about anything. There is a temptation to do that. We'll find out. We will find out. And if there are no negotiations, and if there is no serious attempt on the Chinese part to address some of these fundamental problems, the tariffs go back into effect. My suspicion is, or not suspicion, again, here's a fact. It's not speculation. The Chinese, and I got this from a tweet on the American Jobs Alliance Twitter feed, the Chinese always stall through meaningless talks. For 30 years, the Chinese have been promising to open up their economic system, to become more democratic, more free market, and address the problems that have been brought up under President Obama, President Clinton, President Bush the elder, everybody, going back to Nixon, Jimmy Carter. We have been pointing out the Chinese, pointing out to the Chinese their failure to address certain things, or how they're not living up to the rules that they've agreed to. And what's their response? Well, we'll negotiate it. We'll enter into meaningful talks, high-level negotiations, continuing consideration of these issues and how we can address them. They've been doing that for 35 years while they've been ripping us off every chance. This is a classic Chinese tactic, to say they're going to negotiate and address the long-standing differences or have meaningful dialogues, and that's all it is. It's meaningless dialogues. So we'll see what happens this time.
So, Curtis Ellis, let me ask you this on the topic you mentioned. So, number one, you're saying that it's been reported as 90 days, but it's really 60 days because 1 month has already passed. Right?
Well, 1 month is already built in. I mean, they were supposed to go into effect in 30 days. Now they're saying they'll go into effect in 90 days. So subtract 30 from 90, you get 60.
Right.
So it's a 60-day postponement.
We've got a 60-day postponement. And, we were talking earlier, Curtis, I want to draw an analogy about, remember when President Obama was negotiating the Paris Climate Accords, and he wanted desperately to get in that. And one of the arguments against it was, well, what good is if we do it if the Chinese don't, right? Remember that? So he went to Beijing and he met with the president, and he came back with a commitment that the Chinese government would attempt to evaluate their coal emissions after 2030 for some time in the future. Remember that?
Yeah.
Is there an analogy here?
Sure. The Chinese want everything everything they want, they get now. And everything we want will be at some indefinite point in the future. So you look at the Chinese statement, their version of what came out of this dinner meeting yesterday. Their version is the tariffs are over, and they will buy more American goods according to market demand, meaning as they need them, and basically they get everything they want. They call it a win-win. The Chinese love that formulation. We have reached an agreement that's a win-win, meaning they win twice. That's what win-win means in China. Here we have these high-level, high IQ morons out of academia saying, well, it's a win-win. It's not a win-lose situation. It's not a zero-sum game. Everybody can win. It's a win-win, and which is just ridiculous. There are a few instances where that is the case, but that's this conceptual fantasy. The Chinese, to them, win-win means they win twice. But and speaking of conceptual fantasies, let's get back to the basics here. Let's check the premises here. When we opened up to China, first of all, Nixon went to China to play China off against Russia and to build a split between the two communist giants. That was ancient history. When we opened up economically to China, 1992, Bill Clinton became president. He had campaigned saying he's going to get tough on the butchers of Beijing after Tiananmen Square. I heard on the newscast on your show at the top of the hour that after Tiananmen Square, George H.W. Bush, then president, formerly ambassador to China, had sent a high-level delegation he sent Brent Scowcroft to China to assure them that we weren't going to get tough. But anyway, the rationale for bringing China into the World Trade Organization, removing the human rights annual evaluation of China's human rights record, before we would give them most favored nation trading status, lower our tariffs, open up our market to China. The rationale was that bringing China into this community of trading nations would make China free. It would be more democratic, and it would become more like America. And we'd have more customers to sell our stuff to, and the Chinese would become more democratic and prosperous. Well, that has been proven false. There is no question about it. That has been proven false. Well, if that was the rationale for having massive investment in China, moving our factories to China, moving our research and development laboratories to China, making ourselves entirely dependent on China as a source for our consumer goods, if that rationale was now proven wrong, why do we continue to do all those things? There's no reason to be. We now know that China is a totalitarian nightmare. It is creating this digital surveillance system. It's building up its military. Every dollar we send to them from aisle 6 of Walmart is used to buy missiles aimed at our Navy. Mm-hmm. So if we know that making China more prosperous does not make China more free, which was the original rationale for doing all this stuff, why do we continue to do it? Why do we continue to do it? So now the new rationale that you hear from the bankster gangsters is, oh, well, it's inevitable. Globalization is inevitable. It's a borderless world, and it happens, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Stuff happens. Or the other rationale for continuing this lopsided relationship with China is, oh, it's cheaper goods for Americans. Mm-hmm. We get cheaper goods by having the manufacturing done by slave labor camps in China. We get cheaper Christmas lights, cheaper clothing, cheaper goods, and that's good for Americans. Well, that's the shoddiest rationale ever. By that rationale, we should still have slaves picking cotton in the South. I mean, that was the rationale at that time. Well, it's cheaper goods for everybody. The British used to buy American cotton. They sided with the Confederacy in the Civil War, not openly, but they were ready to, because the British textile manufacturers depended on slave cotton.
Right.
Same way whether from the southern states of America or from the West Indies. So that's a crummy rationale. We get cheaper goods. Well, we'd get cheaper goods if we have slave labor in China, if we have slave labor in Malaysia. Is that the kind of stuff we want? No. Our goal, the goal of our government, should not be cheaper goods. It should be higher wages for Americans, not cheaper goods for Americans, higher wages for Americans. By the way, that's the original rationale of the Republican Party. That was Abraham Lincoln's chief economic advisor, Henry Carey, put forth the economic program for the Republican Party, and it said it must be premised on raising wages for Americans. And we do this by having domestic manufacturing. At the time, the opposition wanted to buy everything from Great Britain. At that time, Great Britain was, quote, the workshop of the world, unquote. Right. And they would become and remain the workshop of the world through a system of free trade. Now, China wants to be the workshop of the world, the factory floor of the world. Mm-hmm. And they seek to hold that position through a doctrine of multilateral free trade. What we need now is nationalism, economic patriotism. And really what we need is patriotism. Look, what we're going to look for in the next 90 days is if there is huge pressure or concessions made by the Chinese to open up key areas that will have domestic influence, so that's what they're going to try to do. This is my guess. Now I'm speculating.
Right.
I think the Chinese are going to make some concessions, open up their credit card market, open up their financial service sector, so that the Wall Street gangster banksters can make money in China, more money than they've been making. And then they, in turn, will put pressure on the White House to hold off on the tariffs.
Right, because they're pulling the strings. And, you know, one of the concerns we had going into this is going into the potential dinner meeting. We had Larry Kudlow in the White House, and we had Steve Mnuchin and the other open traders that basically have, under the table, been undermining the president's trade policies because they don't agree with it, don't like it. They want open trade no matter what, saying, well, you know, we're going to make a deal. We're going to make a deal. We're going to make a deal. But what you're saying right now is courts out in the deal. But what the president did is he didn't make it open-ended. He made it, like you say, 90 days in total, only 60 days. And remember, the president said, I kind of want to go forward with the tariffs, but I'll give him a shot. I mean, isn't that basically what he said? I'm going to give him 60 days to see if they can figure this out. I doubt they're going to do anything, but maybe they will. It was a good meeting, and we'll see what happens. Is that kind
that's
of
right,
where we
exactly. Now we're getting it's put up or shut up time for the Chinese.
Right.
Actually negotiate, do something, sincerely address the problems that are out there, or we go forward with the tariffs. And what the president is doing is saying to everybody, look, I gave him a shot, gave him a chance. Are they actually sincere in doing something? This is their last chance. So we'll see. The other sectors, so I think the Chinese, we're going to see if they open up their financial services market, if they buy more farm goods, because, again, you've got a lot of farm state senators that can put political pressure on the White House. And then the other area that will be interesting to watch is movies, the film industry. The American film industry, Hollywood, wants to make money in China. It's a huge box office market over there. But the Chinese have very strict limitations on foreign films in China.
Right.
This, again, is a politically influential sector in America. Hollywood gives a lot of money to the Democrats especially, but through the film financing mechanism, Wall Street's heavily involved in Hollywood. If they see a chance to make money in China, they will be very happy. So those are the three areas. Let's see if the Chinese, in their gamesmanship, say, well, we'll open up these three sectors, and that will put political pressure on the White House to hold off on further tariffs. Remember, the Chinese have no respect for private property. That's what not the Chinese, communism, the Chinese communists. That's what communism is about. There is no such thing as private property. So we should not be shocked that they have no respect for intellectual property. I mean, that's
right. They go hand in hand.
We're acting shocked, like, oh my gosh, they're not respecting our intellectual property. Well, it's a communist system. There's no such thing as private property.
Right, exactly.
The Wall Street Journal has an editorial out today, of course, praising the president for holding off on the tariffs, and they end their little editorial by saying both sides realize that there is no benefit, an economic Cold War would benefit neither. To let that sink in for a while. An economic Cold War would benefit neither side. Well, how about the other Cold War we had? Did that benefit anyone? Yes, we needed the Cold War to hold off the communist totalitarian threat of the Soviet Union. Well, This time we need an economic Cold War to hold off the totalitarian threat of communist China. Our parents and our grandparents' generation stormed the beaches of Normandy to defend freedom and democracy. Are we willing to pay a couple bucks extra for a toaster oven to do the same thing?
I would think so. Curtis Ellis, great analysis today, as always. I want to thank you. Curtis Ellis is a senior policy advisor with America First Policies. You can also read his columns on WND.com. What else is it on? TheHill.com.
TheHill.com. Yes.
TheHill.com.
And Daily Caller.
And DailyCaller.com. So he's around, plus he's on our show every week. Curtis, we're out of time. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
John Fredericks Radio Network.